Southern California sitting with Doug in a part of the country where 35 plus years ago I used to tour as an evangelical, starting the culture wars that got us President Bush, got my son into Afghanistan and Iraq tangentially years later as a Marine, and then wound up giving us Donald Trump, who rode in on the back of 83% of white evangelicals who voted for him. So this is an area of the country that I was in another incarnation of my life as an evangelical right-wing activist. I come back in penance to try to help people like Doug take the House back in 2018 from someone I regard literally as deranged, but that's a different discussion. So I want you to meet Doug and listen to what he has to say, then support him, donate to his campaign, volunteer if you live in this part of the country, and for God's sake, get involved in taking the House back in 2018. My name's Frank Schaeffer, and here's Doug.
Hi, I'm Doug Applegate. I've been running since 2015 against Darrell Issa in the California 49th Congressional District. It runs from just north of San Juan Capistrano, where we're sitting right now, all the way down to 1 street in North La Jolla. It includes UCSD. It's a beautiful area, and despite what appears to be an idyllic beach district, very unique, it has all of the tensions and the income disparity and the tensions that are felt all around the country. I like to think I have a good perspective on that because I grew up in a blue-collar family outside of Dayton, Ohio. I certainly know what the Midwest is going through right now with the opiate addiction, because people don't believe they have a real shot at the American dream. And it's almost like a regional depression. I think that can be changed. I think that we can steer a different course, but it's going to require people not just to point out what's wrong. That's the easy thing. People need to get involved. People need to get involved to talk to everyone, talk to Republicans, talk to independents, and yeah, talk to people who voted for Trump, because those people that voted for Trump a few years before were voting for Barack Obama. There's a reason for that. It's because Democrats have stopped talking to working families, and Republicans have chosen a communication message of division rather than coming together. And that's what we've always done as a country when we faced severe crises or threats, is come together rather than fragment.
We're going to be talking some more with Doug, and this is such a serious time in history that, you know, someone was asking me, well, why on your own nickel are you running around the country doing these interviews? What good can it do? I really don't know what good it can do, but I do know this, and that is, if anybody has a little bit of a platform and they're not using it to balance, somehow become our own citizen checks and balances in what's going on with Donald Trump and the Congress and the Republican Party and the unleashing of so much hatred and vitriol across the country, then you really have to examine yourself. And it's amazing sitting here with Doug, who's a Marine, because my son was one, and I've always been a little bit ashamed of myself that my son did more for his country by the time he was 19 than I have. And this is my little bit of an effort myself to get more involved. So it's kind of an extra blessing to be sitting here with someone who served in the Marine Corps, having had a son who did the same thing.
I've been a Marine since 1974. As you know, there's no such thing as ex-Marines. Once you're in that club, you never leave. And I'm also a trial lawyer who started out as a civil rights lawyer when I went into the reserves in the mid-'80s and did civil rights cases before Rodney King and before cell phones that I'm on right now. It was a much different practice. But right now, we're also in the middle of a huge struggle to take back the House of Representatives. In these two counties alone, there's 27 Democratic challengers to incumbents, I think, in 6 seats. And it creates a very chaotic environment to really put the best candidates forward, because at present, the Democratic Party doesn't seem to want to get involved in any way, but they want everyone to run a non-negative primary campaign, when all of us are going to face an extremely negative base campaign against the Republican incumbents. I don't necessarily believe that that's the right way to go about the primary. The district is really, the heart of it is Camp Pendleton, as well as a very historical area of South Orange County, from the mission at San Juan, the ruins of the mission at San Juan, all the way to Dana Point of 3 years before the Mass, and written by Henry Dana, and a subsequent lawyer in Boston. I'm an Ohio blue-collar kid. I still refer to myself as a blue-collar kid that grew up in a labor family, and a labor family is what's given me the values that's made me what I am, and probably has driven me more than anything else to take this adventure in politics.
From a religious right background, my dad was one of the founders of the religious right, and I spoke in this area as, you know, the guest at large evangelical bastions that I'm not going to talk about right now, and evangelical TV stations. But it seems that one of the things that we face right now is the Republican Party has tried to borrow Christianity, the flag, patriotism, and now, you know, the whole idea that Sarah Palin introduced about real Americans are sort of Republican right-wingers. And it seems to me, you know, you as a former Marine are on the progressive side of things when it comes to your politics. Is that correct? And can you kind of restate it a little bit? I'm not putting words in your mouth. I just want to know how you feel about that.
I try to avoid labels. I prefer to look at things from the standpoint of issues and principles. I think that what you just described, no matter who utilizes it, is a message of division rather than one of unifying. I think one of the reasons why I stayed in the Marine Corps as long as I did is you can order someone not to be a bigot. Since the desegregation of the military during the Truman administration and the Korean War, that's one of the few places that you can actually enforce people to stop discriminating. It's not always been perfect, but I think that's what is really necessary if you're going to pursue the ideal that's set forth in the Constitution. And it's debatable whether or not we as a country have fully honored that. We're on a journey to do that. That part of it is an impossible task. The other part of it, I believe, is that if you're a thinking person with any degree of empathy, you're trying to justify what a young man or woman actually died for. And when you're in the military, that's a constant process, particularly when we're involved in perpetual war since 9/11. I don't know anybody that hasn't asked the question when a friend or a relative dies in combat or in harm's way, was it worth it? I've seen soldiers and Marines and the looks on their faces when they're doing a memorial for a battle buddy, and they're wondering that. They want to make sure that the death would mean something. But invariably that is it's a process. It doesn't stop. I've known people, friends that died in Iraq in 2006 when I was there, and I constantly reevaluate whether or not what they were doing when they died was worth it.
Yeah, when my son was serving, I always had this feeling that, I'll just be honest with you, that if he had died in Iraq, from my point of view, it was a life lost in a war that was for nothing. But his service and his willingness to serve, for me, kind of overwhelmed that, in the sense that that personal decision was not only honorable, but selfless in a way that made what he was doing worthwhile, with or without the standard of leadership that I would have loved him to have had. Because service in itself means something. What do you think about that?
I don't think that people, once they're in combat, do anything for love of country or patriotism. They do it for the person to their right, to their left. And that's what motivates people. There's a certain bond there that because they're there, they're going to have their fellow Marines, in my particular context, they're going to have their fellow Marines back. And that's the honor. It's person to person. It's for the history of the organization or the unit. Afterwards, I think there's always, because I went in at the tail end of, I went into the officer program at the tail end of the Vietnam War. Raised my hand on 13 December 1974. Saigon fell in April of 75. All of my mentors were Vietnam veterans. And that was a difficult war to justify. But they never felt the need, to justify their service. It was something that was talked about as a learning tool, a teaching point for the profession of arms. And I was always amazed at that. I believe that one of the most important things that we can start talking about right now is the effect of money in politics. And that's my prime reason for why I'm running. And it's not just the typical Citizens United, get money out of politics. I need to get people to start really looking at, if we're going to attack climate change, what we need to do is to end oil company subsidies. 45% of the energy that the United States produces right now would not be economically feasible without subsidies. What we're doing is continuing a 1950s energy metric, when if you go and you look at what corporations, conservative corporations, are presently doing, Walmart, for instance, Deloitte is advising them that the best return on investment presently is to go into 100% renewables. If the oil subsidies were removed, we could get to 100% renewables, not in 2050, 40 or 30, but we can do it within the next 10 years. But you have to ask yourself, why aren't we doing that? Big oil has a huge investment in making sure that a government doesn't relegate their wealth that's in the earth to a worthless, untouchable carbon depository. And that's the only thing that's going to change climate change. If you look at why don't we do a better job in making sure that people have a living wage, $15 an hour minimum wage now, ask yourself, how does money affect that? It affects it significantly. And you have to ask yourself, with politicians, why aren't they doing something about it? And I don't think the Democrats are doing enough in either of those cases. But one of the other issues I think is overwhelmingly important is to do something about the cost of education. You are going to have artificial intelligence, robotics, and automation have a huge diametric shift in our economy. The only way the next generation and the generation after that, our children and grandchildren, are going to be able to compete is with more education. And we're creating such a huge hurdle just to get a college education now. What should happen is what happens in Europe and in the more developed countries in Asia, free education, both starting pre-K, not kindergarten, but pre-kindergarten, so everybody has the same starting point, through to community college-based vocational training and public universities. No cost, low cost tuition for everyone. My campaign is based on everyone contributing, everyone doing something more than just pointing out what's wrong. You can volunteer, but you can also give money in any amount. But we need to make sure that everybody shares in this fight. You can go to applegateforcongress.com, make a contribution. Make a contribution that's recurring. $25 a month adds up in the course of a year, and we have 12 months before the next general election. Exactly 12 months. So I would ask that everyone do something more. Reposting and retweeting our message would do a huge favor to us with name recognition, because name recognition costs money. If you repost, you become an advertising agency at your cell phone, on Facebook, on Twitter. Go to applegateforcongress.com, look at our issues, because we're talking about things that affects working families, something which the Democratic Party seems to have lost their way.
My sense is that the country has lacked real leadership. As the father of someone who was in combat, as someone who does political commentary, as someone who's journeyed from the religious right to progressive politics, one of the things that needs to happen is the Democratic Party itself needs a new face. And this Marine, this lawyer, this candidate who's taken on Darrell Issa, who's been such a pain in, I guess, a pain in the butt to someone like me in terms of all the nonsense that he's been involved with and what he represents about the Republicans. You know, here we have an opportunity to do something. If you're watching this video, please help Doug get elected. Please help him counterbalance the Trump administration. Please help take back the House in 2018. There is absolutely nothing more important we can do as Americans now. We have 12 months. Let's fight like hell. Thanks. My name is Frank Schaeffer.